of our submitters for the day. So we are now moving on to report presentation, deliberations and recommendations. Just to let you know, we do have to adjourn for lunch at 11:45. The Chief Executive and myself have to attend a Zoom meeting. So, but obviously we will re-adjourn at 1 o'clock if we haven't finished deliberating before 11:45. And so first up we have Paulina presenting, are we doing financial contributions first? Because that's second in our papers. But that's fine, we'll switch it up. Welcome.
Apologies, I saw the agenda was first. So the purpose of this report is to summarize the submission and the officer's recommendation to those points. Note that the feedback received on the financial contribution policy and endorse the financial contribution policies as proposed. In my officer recommendation, I'm not suggesting any changes to the current financial contribution policy, and I will elaborate on the points for my recommendation. So the summary of submission, we received 15 submissions to the financial contribution policy. It's very positive to say the majority were in support of the policy. 3 questions were asked when we went out to the public. The first one is, do you support converting office space to residential living within the city centre in order to revitalize this area? The second question was, do you agree with supporting intensification in the city centre over developing in greenfield areas? And the third question, are the proposed exemptions fair? If you think any of them are unfair, what suggestions do you have to improve them? So the majority, as I said, 86% said yes to all of these questions. A couple of people say they didn't support the strategic direction, but they did not provide any specific reasons for why they did not support that direction. Some of the submitters that you heard this morning, they were all in support of the financial contribution policy and support the strategic direction of reducing the financial contribution policy for achieving certain outcomes, but they have consideration and requested some changes. In response to that, I will focus on some of the key points mentioned this morning and why I'm not recommending any further changes. So in relation to Johan's point about applying exemptions to consent already granted, I don't see any problem with that, because that is really what the council is trying to achieve. We're trying to promote intensive development in areas where it's suitable and where it would revitalize our CBD. So I do believe that for consents that have not already been exercised, this can be a possibility, and there is a mechanism to do that. There's no need to change the policy per se, but actually there is a way either applying for variation of consent or applying for a new resort consent, and that can be considered and can be applied a reduction for those type of development. In the case that there has been consent already granted and the development has happened, we don't recommend any retrospective refunding of financial contributions, because how long is the piece of string? How far do you go in terms of previous developments? The second point is also raised by Johan regarding the lack of connectivity between the long-term plan and the current district plan. His points are very valid. We are using the district plan financial contribution, which were developed many years ago, but as we have discussed through workshops before on this topic, the amount of financial contribution that we have arrived for doing it through development contribution or financial contributions is more or less the same. It's considered fair and reasonable to actually cover the cost of future infrastructure and past infrastructure. So there's no need at this stage to actually do that, do any further work in terms of making that connection more clearer. Council has decided to go with financial contribution rather than development contribution policy, because at this stage there are certain uncertainties regarding the Three Water Review. So it's harder to know what projects and when are they going to be developed. However, in the future, this is an interim measure. In the future, in a few years' time, when we do have that clarity, we acknowledge and agree that development contribution will be the best approach for Council to take. It's just we're not ready at this stage to do that. Johan also made the point that the total capital program mentioned in the LTP, it's total around $105 million for the different types of infrastructure, so stormwater, wastewater, and transport, etc. And for recovering those costs during the long-term plan it's impossible, obviously, because the amount of houses that you would need to develop during that period of time. And our response to that is the financial contribution doesn't really cover a period of 10 years. It covers a period much larger than that. We recover a cost for historic projects as well as the future projects, and that spans through the life of the assets rather than actually the 10-year of the LTP. So he didn't raise that point this morning, but it is within his submission. I think that he realized that probably it's not right. Then I'm moving to Somerset's submission in relation to the lower occupancy and demand profile of retirement village. I was just wondering if the submitter actually look at the financial contribution policy that we currently have in place, because we actually recognize the lower occupancy rate of retirement complexes, and these are not charged for household unit equivalent. They are charged per population basis, so it's already discounted to that extent. We don't actually charge financial contribution for libraries or for library reserves and sports ground, and that is stated in the financial contributions policy as well. And a lot of his point in his submission argue that we shouldn't be charging that, and the answer is we don't. The main case that they could potentially have a point, and which I express in my paper, is on the transportation sections, because we do have a charge per residential dwelling. You can argue that they have less vehicle movements. There are ways that we can actually maybe reduce that, but it could be quite complicated, and then you start into arguments of the like that do you pay for the use of the road every time you use it, or do you pay for, are you actually enjoying the fact that you have a road that get access to your retirement village, that your service providers, your doctors, your nurses, the people that go there in and out can use it? So there is an argument that you could reduce this if you want, but we recommend that we don't do it at this stage. There is already a clause as well in the financial contribution policy, 1.8, that allows for, on a case-by-case basis, be able to reduce the financial contribution if the argument is valid and the council can assist it. There was another submission in relation to the timing of payments, and I can see why the applicant want to do that, because obviously the approach, the use of the money for them now is better than in the future. So they want to delay as much as they can the payment to council. There is a complication matter because the district plan already has set up how we're going to charge the financial contribution, and the timing of the financial contribution. If we deviate from that, we might risk some legal challenge, because the RMA, we're acting under the RMA, as well as if we move from at the moment we charge financial contributions we issue an invoice at the time that they request for a section 224 to issue a new title. if we remove that and we issue the title, there is what mechanism has the council later on to chase payment? There's not really a legal teeth to actually go after that payment. So we recommend that the timing stays as per the recommendation in the policy, and no further changes done to that. For retirement complexes, though, we do allow for a lapse on payment, and it's stipulated in the district plan. There was the appointment made about adopting a development contribution policy rather than a financial contribution policy, and that was the point made by Somerset. I think that Phil Ellis also would like to have a little bit more transparency, and as I said, that is probably what the council would be aiming for within the next few years to adopt a development contribution policy. We're currently doing as you are aware, a spatial plan. The spatial plan would result in structure planning. The structure planning would result in knowing and understanding exactly what investment are we going to do for enable the future residential development and where. And with that clarity, we would be able actually to calculate the right amount of financial contribution to be charged as development contribution, to move into development contribution. The next point, the next point referred to the extended financial contribution discounts to include the residential development across the city, because the argument was residential development bring prosperity and growth to your city and have many benefits. It wasn't really explained very well what the exact benefits, but his argument is that we should probably be enabling that and actually incentivizing that by discounted financial contribution. The council has already made the decision to incentivize in more dense development in strategic areas, so I would say that we are already doing that. Somebody needs to pay for the cost of infrastructure. If we discount everywhere across the city, that means that who's going to pay is going to have to be all the ratepayers will have to afford that cost for infrastructure, and that is that fair and equitable. I don't think that we support that at this stage, but it's definitely in line with the national policy statement and in line with the strategic objective of revitalizing your CBD and your commercial areas and enable better access to transport and connectivity. We have identified areas where a discount would be appropriate, and that is stated in the financial contribution policy. And the last point made by submitters is to encourage developments to be self-sufficient and provide for their own infrastructure, because it's more environmentally, it creates environmental benefits. And as part of the district plan review process, council is proposing already changes to the engineering code. We are accommodating for on-site stormwater solutions. We promote small-scale renewable energy solutions, and those things are already enabling. So in answer to that, I don't think that we need to make a change to the financial contribution. We are actually enabling that through the district plan mechanism. So those are the main points raised that you heard this morning, and my recommendation is to not do any changes to the financial contribution policies as it stand for the reason I just mentioned.
Thank you, Paulina. I'll open up for questions. Just one from myself in the first instance. With regards to the Somerset application and financial contribution being discounted for retirement villages, which you, as you've advised, we do already allow for that. I think they were suggesting that we take that a step further and actually differentiate between the different levels of care within retirement villages. So a lifestyle village, obviously they are making the suggestion would have higher use of facilities, etc., than a comprehensive care village. So we don't currently, we've just got one blanket discount at the moment across a retirement village. It's not broken down into different layers.
Retirement village, and there's one more. Let me have a look at it briefly. Oh, it's in the financial contribution policies. Residential care facility and retirement complexes. So we have that differentiation there in the current district plan. Not at the level of detail that they were requesting, though.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
I think there's a differentiation. Residential care villages where people are based in care and are surrounded by villas licensed to occupy. That's the model that comes. When he refers to a lifestyle village, it's more where they've developed something for the over 55s, and they do have minimum age into a retirement village, currently 70. So there's differentiation between lifestyle, which might be over 55s, and no care facility on that site, to a facility like Somerset on Church Road,
Yeah.
which has licence to occupy surrounding a residential care facility. So they're providing continuum care, which is obviously one of the perks.
Thank you.
Just to remind you as well, there is the provision 1.8 in the policy where you can actually calculate the financial contribution on a specific circumstances, and I think that has been used for the current Somerset development, Rita?
Yes. Okay.
That's correct. So there is a mechanism to actually be able to reduce further financial contribution.
Thank you. Councillor Bug.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. On page 59 and 60, there's the issue of extending the financial contribution discount to include all residential developments to promote more houses being built. And I just couldn't quite understand the second comment made there. If you could just unpack that a little bit for me, please, about a strategic approach for waivers, promote intensification, etc.
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, that is related, Maxine, to the objective that we have, that we propose as part of the waivers for financial contributions. So we have identified areas in the Napier CBD, Taradale Centre, Mariwa Centre, and many other areas which are mapped in your policy. And if you can look at the figure 4 in page 19 of your financial contribution, we have identified these nodes around commercial center and CBD that we would like to see more intensification of residential development. So that is high density areas. And to promote that, we are proposing a reduction on financial contribution. Sorry, is this one? Figure 4?
Page
19.
in the
The attachment.
One of those.
Oh, yes, it's one of the
Yeah.
attachment. I'll
Sorry.
So the main purpose, Maxine, is to be able to intensify.
Page 82. Yeah. Sorry, I'm floundering. a bit
Sure.
here. Oh, yeah. Oh, get it. A little pink circle.
So the reason why we want to intensify these areas is because they are obviously benefits to the city to have a dense developments around your service, your core commercial and service areas in your CBD. So there is in terms of more obviously for retailer, economic purpose, for vibrancy, for sustainability, access to your transport or access to your shopping center, your local centers, your reserves. There is a whole range of benefit that derive from actually having dense development around your commercial nodes. So that's the reason why we said, okay, we want to intensify that. We've been talking about revitalizing the CBD for a long time. We want to attract apartment living in the CBD is one of the objectives of the district plan. This is just another mechanism that we are incentivizing that by reducing the financial contribution.
Councillor Crown.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Paulina, we had a number of submitters today and in the written submissions talk about the perceived lack of transparency as to what the financial contributions we're actually paying for. And I noted that in point 2.3, it clearly outlines the types of activities that we're attributing to the financial contributions. I just wanted to know, have those changed from what we previously do to this draft? And also, what level of detail is apportioned to each of these activities, I suppose? What sort of accounting's done to attribute financial contributions to each of those activities currently?
Yeah, so to respond to that, the purpose of collecting financial contributions has not changed. So that is really to service the infrastructure, your stormwater, your water, your wastewater, your roading, your reserves, and all of that. So the purpose is the same. What has changed is that in the district plan nearly 20 years ago, when it was calculated, the financial contribution were heavily weighted towards transport. Nearly 50% of the financial contributions were used to upgrade roads. And moving into the future, the cost would lie more in providing infrastructure related to three waters. So that would be the heaviest burden on the cost. So that is a discrepancy, which luckily, by having a financial contribution policy, there's no legal challenge about that. We're actually doing because the purpose of the collection of money is the same. We don't have any risk. Obviously, for transparency, we would like to have it aligned, and that's what we're gonna do in the future. But we acknowledge that the amount, regardless of being water or transport or something else, the amount is more or less the same. What we would charge, whether we would did it like, for example, in the district plan, we charge $19,000 per unit, considering 50% for transport and 30% for water or whatever. At the moment, we're charging nearly the same amount. However, the distribution is different. So it's not that we're charging more or too much less. It's more or less the same. And through the luckily the financial contribution doesn't require that dollar spend. What is your capital program? What is your project? We don't have to provide that, but we will amend it. In short answer, we will amend it in the future.
And sorry, and just supplementary. So that level of transparency is what we're aiming for once we move to the development contributions policy. And since we review every 3 years, that is on the horizon.
That's correct.
Okay.
Councillor Simpson.
So I think you've covered some of the base there, but basically around the timing of assessment, payment associated with what was the rationale as to why you need to take the money up front opposed to getting, say, a payment up front, payment completion? What's the limitation?
If you issue the title, how do you collect the money after that? What mechanism do you have to go and request the person that already has built their house, or they have already
Would it not be tied to code of compliance?
Rita would be able to answer that.
Under the Building Act, we've got no. Under the Building Act, we've got no mechanisms to actually withhold the code of compliance to get money for financial contributions. We can only do it under the RMA. It's two different pieces of legislation. So if we allow a developer to build a house, to get a title, he can sold the title to a new owner who may or may not be aware that they still need to pay financial contributions on it. Council's got no mechanism to actually withhold the code of compliance to get the financial contribution. So that is our biggest concern of deferring it also. And you also don't want to defer payment of financial contributions onto a new owner. The developer's gone, he's done the development, and then it's a new person who's actually bought the property, suddenly gets an invoice of $12,000, $13,000, $20,000 for development contributions, which they might not be aware of at the time when they purchased the property. So that's the biggest reason. It's the two different legislations that tie our hands a bit on that one.
And thank you, and through the Mayor. And just to add to that, as you understand, any development, comes with substantial cost, and whether that cost is actually borne, fully by the developer or, partially by the ratepayer as well. So it's that middle ground about, and ensuring that we've got an understanding of the commitment of the developer for that development and going forward, and being able to fund it, and not having sort of council fund it in the interim and having that debt ratio increased and that risk increased as the others have pointed out about getting that funding back. So it's actually about, ensuring that they've thought about that longer term project, and we're understanding the full infrastructure costs up front as well.
Do we have any further questions? I guess just for myself, with regards to it, was good to hear that in terms of considering existing resource consents for the exemption around conversions in our CBD, that we can apply that without needing to make any changes to the draft policy. And I'm imagining that probably doesn't apply to very many properties at the moment. Okay, so it would be simple enough for us to actually advise that developer as well that they had the ability to do a variation to the resource consent to take advantage of the new exemption.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, so the officer's recommendation before us is that we note the summary of feedback received on the financial contributions policy. B, we endorse the financial contribution policy in its current state. C, note that the financial contribution policy may be subject to minor changes arising from the long-term plan hearings. And D, note that the final policy will be brought back to Council for adoption on the 30th of June in line with the timeframes for the adoption of the long-term plan 2021-2031. Do I have a mover and seconder so that we can move into debate, please? Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Thank you, Councillor Crystal. Councillor Taylor, did you wish to speak to the recommendation?
Just to say that I think it's been a good process, and I thank you for your officer's comments, because the submitters did raise some interesting issues, and it was very good to hear your responses to that and clarify some issues for us. So I fully endorse the process that we've been through, and I think all submitters have been given the opportunity to make their point, and it has been.
Thank you. Councillor Crystal. Okay. Did any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. So we'll move on to the proposed amendment of the revenue and financing policy, rates, remission policy and rating policy. And I'd invite Gary up to present the report, please.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, before we proceed, I'd just like to highlight an error in page 52 of the agenda, and it's just with regards to the rates remission policy. So there's a reference to semi-rural property, and it should be rural residential. So thank you to the person that highlighted that, and it's something that will be corrected in the final version. So in this report, we're presenting the results of the public submissions on revenue and financing policy, rates remission policy and rating policy, as mentioned. Although these policies were adopted in February of this year, issues arising from the long-term plan have resulted in an additional review. There are also points of clarification that we require. So the feedback on the three, because I won't labour this too long, is as follows. So for the revenue and financing policy, and I'll just bring that up. I was asking the question about the inclusion of loan funding for operational expenditure and general rates funding for capital expenditure for council housing activities. So of the 16 submissions received, 64% agreed. Responses were varied, but touched on issues such as housing availability and the additional burden put on ratepayers. So again, with this, there is an officer's response within the paper, so I won't labour that too much, but if you've got any questions after, certainly raise those. With regards to the rates remission policy, of the 12 submissions received around this, which there were two questions, 73% agreed with the removal of the remission for residential land in commercial or industrial areas. For the second question, 82% agreed with delegating the authority or authorisation of remissions for refuse collection and curbside recycling targeted rates to the Chief Financial Officer. Now, with regards to the rating policy, we didn't ask any specific questions, but it was still open for submissions if people did want to do so. So we did receive 2 written submissions in that space, and they were received by commercial property owners. And the main concern was around the combined impact of the revaluation and rates increase on their rates obligations for the year, for 2021. So one respondent has also suggested with starting with a lower differential in year 1 and progressively increasing that over time. Now, regarding the 3 policies, the council officer recommendations are detailed in the first pages, which is for the revenue and financing policy and the rates remission policy to adopt those. Now, with regards to the rating policy, we would just like to get guidance from the councillors as to what they would like to do. So, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I'll open up for questions, and as Gary has highlighted, we would probably like to just also have a discussion about those submissions directly relating to the revaluation and whether there is any desire to introduce some phasing for those commercial ratepayers. But open up for general questions first. That's easy. Councillor Simpson.
Perhaps, Gary, for those watching, remission smooth effects of change in rates. Currently, there's a threshold. Can you just explain the process of somebody, and we know there are a few, that are significantly affected by our current policy changes? Can you just explain the process and how you are designated as eligible for that remission?
Of course, through you, Madam Mayor. So with that remission, just to build on a little bit more, I haven't got it immediately in front of me, but I can talk about it generally. So where there is a change in the policy that significantly impacts on the rates of ratepayers, council has the ability to phase in that change over 3 years. Now, during the deliberations and final decisions in February, council decided to apply that. So what we're looking at is a threshold of pockets or groups where it would likely have a 25% or more increase in their rates over any given year to be able to spread that out. So with that remission, it is actually a tool that council can use to apply rather than somebody specifically do that. And so as part of the decision-making process, council elected to apply that phasing over 3 years for all properties in Napier. Now, part of the reason for that is that the rates that are collected across all properties are interrelated. You can't isolate a single area without it impacting on all the others. So because it was quite a large fundamental change, it impacted on everybody, and so the decision to phase it for all properties was made to try and smooth that out and to reduce, in layman's terms, the lumps and bumps in the rates. So for instance, in the case of one group of properties, if we were to provide phasing there, it may actually increase the pressure on other sectors or other rating sectors within Greater Napier. And so that's why we took that approach of automatically applying it across all properties. Has that answered the question?
Yes, thank
Yep.
you, Gary. Yeah, the point of the question was to let the residents know that if they think they've got a big shock coming, we've actually taken steps already to minimise
Yes.
or reduce that impact, but that they can expect a incremental increase over the 3 years to bring them up to parity.
If I may also, sorry, just to add that, the reason why it's limited to 3 years is because we have the property revaluations occurring every 3 years, and so it can potentially be a reset of rates when that occurs. Now, the legislation that governs revaluation is very different from the one that governs ratings themselves, and so because they're independent, but one is dependent on the other, it can cause some problems there. So we are limited to that 3 year period because we just don't know what's going to come in that following 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to provide some further clarity around that remissions policy, is that also available to smooth the impact of the revaluations on rates?
That's a really good question. No, it isn't. And part of the reason being is that the remissions policy relates to changes of council policy, not changes through revaluation, which again is a completely separate act. So yes, this is based on the changes that were adopted by council earlier in the year, not because of the revaluations themselves.
Thank you. Okay. Well, we have a series of recommendations before us across the three policies, so we'll just work through them. Revenue and financing policy, that council adopt the inclusion of loan funding for operational expenditure and general rates funding for capital expenditure for council housing activities. And 2, that council adopt the revenue and financing policy in this amended form. Rates remission policy, that council adopt the proposed removal of the remission for residential land in commercial industrial areas, and that council adopt the delegation of sign-off for the remission of refuse collection and or curbside recycling targeted rates to the Chief Financial Officer, and that council adopt the rates remission policy in this amended form. Lastly, the rating policy, that council direct officers on the following terms: confirm the unconnected but within 100 metre fire protection rate for other rating units should remain at 50%, and confirm whether the stormwater rate for commercial and industrial remains at 250% or be increased to 260% in line with the proposed differential rate, and confirm the final phasing for differential rates. So we do need to just confirm, obviously, in the rating policy here that we are wanting the fire protection rate and for other rating units to remain at 50%. Does anyone wish to debate or deliberate on that any further? No. And also around confirming the stormwater rate for commercial and industrial remains at 250 or should be increased to 260 in line with the proposed differential rate. my recommendation is that that be increased to the 260 to be in line with the proposed differential rate. And lastly, confirm the final phasing schedule for differential rates. And this particularly is related to the impact that the revaluation has had across different differentials and whether we would like to phase that in over up to a 3-year period, or whether we will leave it so that that revaluation impact is in full from the immediately the adoption of the policy. Councillor Taylor.
I would support the incremental.
Okay, so just for our governance team, just to let them know in terms of what we're putting forward as a recommendation, in the rating policy, which is where we do need to make these few changes. Firstly, B1, we are confirming that it will be at 50%. B2, we are increasing the stormwater rate to the 260%. And B3, we have on the table that we will be phasing in over 3 years for the differential rates. So I'd ask for a mover and seconder of the recommendations we have before us.
Can I just ask, I wanted to ask a question, but are these going to be dealt with as one piece or in segments? 'Cause
I think we can deal with them as one piece because it's probably only really that last bit in the rating policy that's likely to generate any discussion anyway, I would have thought, unless you've got anything in the other two policies that you...
No, I support them. But I just wanted to ask a question, if it's appropriate, Madam Mayor, about the rates remission policy section, about the delegation of a sign-off for the remission of refuse collection, etc. Now, I understood when we introduced this at the beginning of the financial year last year that people who did not use that service, at the end of the financial year, this would all be tallied up and reports made on anybody who did not use the service or only used half of it? Just if I could have a bit of a clarification on that, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor. That's a really good question. So what we were looking to do as part of that remission is to provide an incentive for people that put out reduced waste and recycling to get a discount in their rates. Now, to be able to do that, we needed to establish a history of reduced waste and recycling being put out. And to date now, we've got about 2,700 people that have responded, would like to apply for that remission. So now, between now and when we set rates, we're going to be reviewing all the people that have applied, and we'll also be looking at an appropriate level to provide a discount at. So we had to get an understanding of what that was before we look at what we can apply in that space. And so that's something that will be provided to Council on 30th of June, I think it is, for the rate setting report.
Thank you.
John.
Through that, man, just to that, the remission was about those people that only put their bins out less than that remission was about those residents that put their bin out 26 times a year or less, and so we need to collect data on their put out rates to be able to support any application for remission. And if I just remind you, Gary may have already alluded to this, but it may not be a 50% remission because the cost of the service relating to the weight of rubbish in the bin is only a small component of it, not 50% of the component. So there's still a lot of baseline cost in providing the truck that drives past, regardless of whether they put their bin out or not. So there's still some work to do on that. Thank you.
Councillor Crystal.
Through the Mayor, Gary, does this also relate to the people, I know we had submissions about the people that have two sets of bins on one property? remember we had the hairdresser and Paradale, and so they apply for this.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if they're demonstrating reduced waste, then yes, they would potentially be eligible for it. So if they've got 2 sets of bins and they're only putting out 1, then they'd be able to receive that on 1 set of bins, or on both if they're putting out both at a reduced level. Yeah, we still have to work out exactly what that looks like, but yes, potentially that'll be the case.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just slightly unclear around the revenue and financing policy recommendation I around adopting the general rates funding for capital expenditure in the housing activities. That doesn't seem to collate with my recollection of our discussions so far on this activity, nor the proposed 0% public good component that we identify in the schedule. So I'm just wondering why there's a proposal there to, from my perspective, suddenly include general rates funding of capital expenditure in the housing activities portfolio. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding something.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, I'll answer that one if you like. It is not a primary source of funding. It is an option there should we require any funding from rates in the future for capital, just like we have proposed to loan fund the operating expenditure.
And just through the Mayor, so the revenue and financing outlines exactly what source of funds at any point in time that we can actually utilise, and so there may be a situation where we've got a one-off requirement for rates rather than in loans, and so it might be a small, only a small discretionary piece of work as opposed to a large program of work. So this is actually a funding source, and so it allows us to actually use rates where appropriate and we're signed off by council. So otherwise you'll be looking for loans, but otherwise if we do have rates funding available, then we can actually provide for that as required.
Can I tease out, I suppose, where the recommendation has come from to include rates? I mean, from my perspective, we've been reasonably forthright in our view that it should be loan funded in the interim, and I understand that's our current policy. Understanding that this is a mechanism we may want to use in future, that's not something that necessarily I would support, and I've supported up until now leaving rates funding off the table. I don't think it's appropriate. So where has this recommendation come from to include it?
Through the Mayor, so historically council were investing $100,000 in capital per year to fund the capital program. But besides rates funding, it wasn't a loan funded contribution into the capital program.
So this isn't a change in policy, and that's what you're saying?
That's right.
Yeah. The existing policy.
Correct. But with the transition that we've made, it was just providing that clarity. The increased level of the work program that we've got ahead of us does require us to be looking at loan funding for that.
And sorry, just to supplementary to that, if it's not a change in policy, why is it part of our recommendation?
The policy has changed and it wasn't introduced at the time. So it's just providing the option should the need arise.
So it's happened without council approval until now? Without being consistent with council policy.
Through the Mayor, so the previous policy that we did have provided for that. It just hadn't been picked up and made available in the changes that were put through in the new revenue and financing policy.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a provision of funds as opposed to making the decision actually to rate fund anything at this point in time. You'll always get the decision to rate fund.
Through you, Your Worship, while I have you, Adele, what is council's other alternative if it chose not to include rates funding for the housing activity at this stage? What are the consequences of that?
Through the Mayor, you wouldn't be able to use rates funding for the purposes of housing.
Which we're currently doing to the extent of 100,000 per annum?
So it's just
Happy to take it on advisement if we need a bit of time.
it's just a funding source as opposed to an allocation of funding. I suppose that's the difference. And without providing the direction from council to allow for rates funding at any point in time, then we wouldn't be able to do it or provide us an option to do so if we needed to. So at the moment, as we've recommended and what we've been consulting on is around that loan funding, particularly in the increased capital program, which we will definitely be loan funding.
And perhaps someone could step in and sort of enlighten me. I recall us very clearly through our consultation, pre-consultation on the housing issues, standing up and saying council has a policy that it needs to cover its funding in the housing activity from user pays, and if there is any overrun, we propose to use loans. Council has a very clear policy not to use rates, and so I'm just trying to collate that public communication that we've had, and which has always been my understanding with what I'm seeing now and hearing in terms of an existing operational 100,000 coming from rates. So I'm still left a little confused if you can help.
Again, sorry, through the mayor. So the 100,000 was a historic amount. It's not the requirement going forward. So this 100, the rates money in the identification of funding is not any specific amount. But take, for example, if council had a surplus in the current year and it wanted to allocate some funds, it wouldn't have the ability to allocate funds to housing, as an example. So that would be rate-funded money coming into the program, and the current policy doesn't allow us to do so. So that would be one example. But at the moment, as we've said, there will be another piece of work around the ongoing funding of housing. At the moment, because of the increased costs, it isn't cutting its cloth, and so we'll be reviewing our current financial situation in this area anyway as part of the work that we're doing in the housing space.
Just to wrap that up, the current policy doesn't allow it. This is proposing to include it, and that's up for council discussion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. So are you proposing that we are making an amendment to the recommendation here? Because I agree with you, there's a level of discomfort for me, because this isn't something that has been a council direction. We have been quite clear that general rates would not be used to subsidise operational or capital expenditure for council housing, and certainly not until we've completed the review that we have underway at the moment.
Yeah, I'm really happy to move that amendment to the proposal, or I suppose a new substantive, just essentially removing the
General rates funding for capital expenditure.
Yeah. And
Could I ask a question about that, please, Madam Mayor? Sorry. In the document we've got about the funding, activity funding sources, and it lists under page 25, it's under the operational and capital funding for housing, it does list operational fees and charges, general rates and loans. And the same general rates is included in the capital as well. Are we saying that the general rates and the loans were not there up until this meeting?
The loan funding has been there, and that's what we've been out publicly consulting on.
Yep, loan funding is what we
But
did
certainly
consult on.
I've not been involved in any consultation where we have sought feedback or shared that we're intending to amend the policy to include rate funding.
What I'm asking is, are we amending it, or were the general rates there previously?
We've
before?
just had confirmation that they weren't there
They weren't.
previously.
Okay, so they've been added.
yeah, so I'm happy to speak.
So we have Deputy Mayor Brosnan moving the motion. Do we have a seconder? I'm happy to second from the chair. Okay, yeah, we'll just have a moment for council officers to confer.
Thank you. So this is the first time that we're loan funding housing.
Yeah.
If we take this out,
We're not taking the loan funding yet?
no, but if we take the rates out, so the point of difference here is this is the first time we're loan funding.
Yeah.
Right, so we need to be able to, if we happen to be in a surplus, pay back that loan or reduce reduce the loan
So
rates.
it's re-
Is that
Okay,
right?
okay, well, that's what needs to be explained.
Yeah,
because
so
that's not-
I
yeah.
just wanted to make sure I was clear on that.
Yeah.
So the difference is it's the first time we're loan funding housing. So therefore, if we're having to get into a massive surplus, etc.
So should
we
that,
need to amend
rather than
that.
that being capital expenditure, would it be just loan edited?
We differentiate between operating and capital expenditure.
Leave the air.
Yeah, so it's just ensuring that we do have that stream of funds.
I can't believe
If we
that
want
this
to
has
channel
been
it,
just.
otherwise we've got no ability to.
Surely the bit with the. Just there.
Yeah, it's taking.
Clarification on the general rates inclusion, so I'll pass across to Adele to speak to that.
And thank you, and through the Mayor. So with regards to the rates, rates can also come through from year-end surpluses as well, and so there's the ability of council to make any decision around the use of any surplus should it arise. We don't know the timeframes in which this policy is going to be effective for until the decision is made around the future of housing. So this gives and enables council with the ability to use rates. An option if it needs to, including any loan repayment. So that's why it needs to be included both on the operating and then the capital side.
Through the Mayor, sorry, just further to that, and apologies for the short break there, I was just trying to get my own head around this, but essentially the point of difference here is it's the first time that we are using loan funding for our housing. So therefore the inclusion of the ability to use rates means that if we happen to be in a situation where we didn't need to use all of that loan funding, you could use rates. So the big point of difference here is the loan funding and our ability to allow for some flexibility into the future as to how housing is funded. Hopefully that made it a little clearer and not worse.
And further to that, any decision to use rates to, for example, pay down some of that loan funding would have to come through as a decision of council. So just checking whether that changes
Doesn't
the
actu-
movers.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it doesn't actually change my view in terms of council's policy. And I think the policy is the starting point for that. And so if I had a seconder and if we were to discuss that, I would give my reasons for supporting keeping it as loans funding, not rates funding.
Well, I'm going to remove being seconder because I can actually see the benefit of having that ability through a council decision process to utilise any surplus funds in that manner. So do we have a seconder for the recommendation as it stands? Okay. So substantive motion is lost, and we will go back to the original motion, which includes general rates funding for capital expenditure. And the other major sort of change in this is back to the rating policy again, where we're confirming the phasing schedule for differential rates over a 3-year time frame. So I am happy to move the recommendation from the chair if I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. It feels like we've been discussing these policies forever. So thank you, Gary, for all the work that you've done on it, and thank you for all of the staff and councillors that have been involved in the review of these policies. And really, I think we've arrived at a place that we've tried to be as fair and equitable across all our ratepayers as possible, which is not a difficult and not an easy process to work through, because whatever you do to try and mitigate the impact on one group of ratepayers always has a flow-on effect on others. So it's very much a balancing act. So yes, I'm very happy to move the recommendation before us today. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, I'd like just to add that when Gary was speaking, he referred to February when we did some discussions and this policy came through. And I'm thinking, was it February 2021 or February 2020? But yes, we have been at it. And just to talk to the point of revenue and financing, point I, or 1, I think how it is now worded provides us with flexibility and ability to use funds where they where they come from or where they're available from. And as it is still subject to a council decision, then we have those safeguards. So I would have voted against the other.
Thank you. I'll open up for other councillors to speak.
Just a
Deputy
process
Mayor.
question. I would intend to vote against I. Are we taking them separately or together?
Against A2, AI.
AI.
I can take those separately.
Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the revenue and financing policy, I will put that recommendation, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Noted. Deputy Mayor Brosnan is voting against the revenue and financing policy. Moving to the rates remission policy and the rating policy. Are we happy if I move these two collectively? Excellent. So all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh, and noting, yes, that point A5 on our papers, it referred to it as the revenue and financing policy, and it should be the rates remission policy. Yeah. So all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Gary. And we will close our meeting now with our closing karakia, please. Ki tau te rangamare, ki rona I ngā iwi katoa o Ahirere, kia piki te ora, te kaha me te māramatanga, I ngā